Hi everybody, today I'm just going to look at mystical music, music for mystics. Now, mysticism is a religious thing in the main. All religions have had elements of mysticism in them, and it's about the experience of something which is beyond the senses, but also beyond the intelligence. So it's experience something beyond. Now, some people feel that they can touched by God. Other people feel that they can aspire to get to a state of consciousness, a nirvana, whatever it may be, where they believe that they can experience something of the unknowable. And I thought, well, let's have a look at some of the music which is perhaps related to it. Now, most music is not directly related to mysticism because it tends to be more of it can be a group activity, but more of an individual thing. Partly, especially in, for example, Christian history, it's far more related to the hermits and the people who took themselves off, and the monks, etc. And there are works written, for example, Julian of Norwich, Revelations of Divine Love, in the medieval period. She wrote that amazing book about her experiences of God. And of course, across all the religions, that's something we find. And now, I'm just going to look briefly at a few examples of people we know and who are very common names who have perhaps tried to achieve that through music. Now, of course, a lot of people get in our society, in our culture, and in fact for a long time, have used drugs to sort of escape reality, but also to perhaps even to inform and experience a new reality as they see it, whether it be through getting just stoned or whatever. But let's have a look at a few different examples now. If I'm going back to the medieval times, we have this classic Abbess Hildegard of Bingen here, Gothic voices. This is all Christian music from 1170, all choral. Now, I wouldn't say that this was directly mystical music. She's not trying to achieve communion with God. She's expressing something of God, and expressing words and her feelings and responses using the Bible or whatever to share, and everyone else can join in, and the nuns, etc., would sing these songs, just like with psalms of old. Now, there are all sorts of different people and cultures have used this kind of thing. For example, here, completely off, here we have the Yaqui Indians, and who use mescaline, who get themselves into a trance, dance themselves into a trance, take loads of mescaline. And this is music and ritual dances. Incredibly powerful stuff, and they're trying to reach this point, this place of being, this state of altered consciousness through this music. A lot of it's very rhythmic. It's incredibly intense. I think it's an amazing thing to hear. Now, they are obviously directly trying to get to a state of being. Now, sometimes, let me have a look here. There are ways of doing that, through extra things like drugs, etc. Now, when we're looking at musicians who perhaps have some of that, or composers who have some of that element of trying to reach the unknowable, trying to express something through the unknowable, a really famous example is John Coltrane, who went from his favourite things to albums like this and Ascension, where he was trying to achieve communion with the Spirit, trying to get something else, just take himself beyond the world, through his playing. Like he had to have some sort of connection between him and something other through his playing. Whether he believed some spirit was working through him, or whether he was trying to achieve that, it's a balance and a fine line, really. But I remember being in an improvised band for years. I remember playing. There were times where all of you, because I was always seeking this point, that's why I did improvised music. There's all of you all come together, and as an exaltation, if you like, you're above where you normally are for a time, and everyone is on the same page, and this is sort of elevated state. Doesn't last, but it's there for a time. It's sort of like this sort of thing you're trying to achieve. If you want to get the absolute pinnacle of musical experience, in my experience, that's the thing I always used to look for, and occasionally you get those amazing moments. But there was a guy, I remember playing with one guy once. Could I get him to play a chord? No, he would never play a chord. I tried to get him to play a riff. Couldn't get him to play a riff. He was only ever seeking this note. He was obsessed with finding this particular sound, and he would only ever play it. It was like the Steve Hillage, the riff thing, this thing. Infuriating, but I understand from his point of view why he was doing it. It was like he had to experience this thing. Anyway. And of course, artists like Popover, Florian Fricker, one of the few true geniuses of modern music. And I think he managed to achieve something because he tapped in, even the name, it's from the Mayan Book of the Dead, he tapped in to something ancient and something beyond. And so he was always expressing and looking to express something beyond the norm, something beyond just you switch on the radio, you play, you go through the motions with the guitar. The music, all of our albums are somehow exalted in some way, somehow take you somewhere, and you have to kind of, it's like an elevated thing. You have to sort of step back and go, oh, wow. And there's some sort of chiming quality with the guitar. It's almost like the bells, there's a chiming sound and a rhythm to it, but also such a kind of spiritual aspect. Now, where are we going here? There are certain artists like Dead Can Dance who have those qualities, who have an element of that, and have a medievalism and this kind of approach to it, but aren't really. They're not actually aspiring to do that. They're not aspiring to connect in any way. They're not aspiring to actually achieve something or to reach some sort of goal or target. But they're playing music which is kind of initially you might think sounds similar, but it doesn't have that same quality. It's not to say the music's bad, because it isn't. I'm just talking in these terms. Now, there are other pieces, for example, this is Sibelius. A lot of his work is, you could suggest, has an element of spirituality about it, in his quest to express the world around him, and Finland as a new country at the time. But as this connection, he was trying to kind of connect with nature and express nature through his music, and some of his pieces kind of get close to that. But in terms of mysticism, it's not really mystical, but there's an element of connecting with nature which is different. Now, that same can be said for artists like the acid folk kind of feel with espers, and I touched upon that in the autumn video, as a quality of the landscape. And sometimes a very small landscape, you can almost imagine like a woodland clearing with bands like that, because of the small amounts of instruments and the kind of the intimacy of it, and this solitude and the solitary nature of being in those sorts of places at particular times of day and night, etc. But there are certain people, again, who perhaps were trying to get that something extra. Now, Messiaen is one of those. Always sort of creating a sort of transcendence in the sound. I don't think all of it is always accessible. It can be quite intense and quite difficult, I think, at times. But he's trying to express something, not just of his faith, because a lot of mysticism obviously is based on a faith that you are going to experience something. Whatever your faith may be, you can tap into something and you can experience something beyond and bring it into now, if you like, or touch upon something deep within you. And Messiaen had an element of that in his music, and there's a soaring quality, and there's a kind of, it's almost like you're in the clouds, you know. He's risen that high, kind of thing. He's in the clouds. He's not stuck to the earth in his music. He's not rooted. Obviously, he's rooted in structure, etc. But at the same time, there's a kind of it's not a looseness, but a quality of how do you describe it? Like a gushing, a rushing, but also a slow kind of. It's not a one, but it is like being. I mean, how I can picture it is just like being in the sky in a cloud, and you're drifting quality, but there's a power and an intensity to it. Anyway, now other cultures, of course, the Japanese and the Chinese, very, very good at describing and connecting with nature in their countries, in their worlds, and through their instrumentation, etc., using various sort of flutes and woodwind and whatnot. And I think it's harder for Western people, obviously, to kind of connect it in the same way. It's a very difficult thing to understand when we're born in a culture, and when we grow in a culture, when we are from a certain culture, to connect with another culture when you may have been born, growing up in another culture which is quite distinctly different. The Japanese culture is distinctly different from our own, and it can be difficult to sort of understand or grasp in the same way, perhaps, what they are aspiring to express and what they are trying to connect with. But again, for me, some of it feels more natural rather than an aspiring to the mystical. But there are, just to finish, a couple of examples. Now, I would love it if if anyone does a follow-up, this would be amazing. I could think of a couple of people who might. But there are a few bands and few artists who actually do have a kind of aspirational quality to the mystical, if you like. Now, this says it in the title: infinite spirit music, live without fear. This has got elements of free jazz. But here we got the song titles: Father Spirit, Mother Love, Soul Flower, Live Without Fear, Ritual. An incredibly excellent and intense record. This is on Jazzman. Ridiculously difficult to find and rare originals. There are hardly any were pressed. Might cost you at least £1,000, wonderful stuff. And this one, Zarya the One. This one is, oh my goodness, this is fantastic. This is a Christian thing. There's just a few words, maybe a couple of verses at the beginning of tracks, a couple of the tracks, where they repeat these motifs and maybe a couple of verses just for a minute or so, these female singers. And then it goes into these incredible grooves. The bass playing on this is so deep and powerful. And they are expressing, and you see the people there, this gets something towards the mystical. Definitely, there's something mystical about it. But anyway, I kind of rushed this today. I just picked a few examples because I think there's other ones that will come to mind. But if you've got any others that you want to show and you want to follow this video up, that would be amazing and remarkable. It would be great to see something like that. Anyway, this was a bit loose and a bit patchy in places because, as I say, I just pulled it together. But you could go much deeper into this, and perhaps I should have done. But it is what it is, and I will see you all soon.